Welcome to the Philos Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominque Kaufman, and today we're joined again with our fellow here from the Philos Project, Hadiel Oais, to discuss Hezbollah and Israel's fight in the Northern Front. Welcome, Hadiel.
Thank you for having me again, Dominique.
Thank you for coming back on. You were a fan favorite. So this week, there's been a lot of news coming out of the North. Obviously, we talked last time with you about Israel's fight with Hamas in the south and the potential ground offensive into Rafah and why that's important to understand. And this week, news that the Israeli military's Air Force struck a northeastern city in Lebanon, Baalbek, and hit two Hezbollah members who were killed in those strikes, happened this Monday. So I would love for you to help us understand what's happening in Lebanon. For some context for the audience, since October 7th, there have been 135,000 displaced Israelis within Israel, and many of those are actually from the north, as they've had to move away from the border because of missile fire. But this most recent airstrike in Baalbek in the northeast is notable because it's the furthest into Lebanon that this fighting with Hezbollah has occurred in the north since the start of the war with Hamas. So, Hadiel, maybe we can start with some of the basics. What is Hezbollah and what is their relationship with both Israel and then the fight with Hamas in the south?
Yes, thank you again, Dominique. So, as you know, the Israeli Palestinian conflict is not the only conflict in the Middle East. This is a region that's full of conflicts and adversaries. And there is another huge conflict, which is between parts of the Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims, which are supported usually by Iran. Of course, Iran supports also Sunni militant groups like Hamas. Hamas is almost the only Sunni militia that Iran supports. And Hezbollah is one of the strongest and main militias that Iran supports. Hezbollah has big control on Lebanon. After the civil war, Hezbollah is the only group that still have arms and weapons in Lebanon, and it is under the slogan of defending Lebanon from Israel. Although many political groups in Lebanon uh, really reject that idea, rejects Hezbollah's influence on locals and on local politics in Lebanon, and they tell Hezbollah, well, we don't want you to defend us from Israel. We want peace with our neighboring countries, or at least if we don't have official peace with Israel, we don't want Lebanon to be dragged into other conflicts like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But Hezbollah, of course, for political reasons and because they are the main militia that Iran counts on in the Arab region, they continue to fight Israel. They are on the borders with Israel. They are located in a very strategic location for Iran to be able to launch attacks as they are doing these days against Israel and against the northern borders of Israel.
Hmm. And for our audience, can you provide some context too, separate from the Palestinian question? Because Israel's had their own tensions with Lebanon. Can you talk maybe about 2006 and the Second Lebanese War
Mhm.
and what
So
those
the
relationships have looked like? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So again, the tension between Israel and Lebanon is not in general with all the Lebanese people. It is with Hezbollah, this Iranian-backed militia that's controlled by a few Shia groups. Also, not all the Shia of Lebanon agrees with Hezbollah or supports Hezbollah. And since 2006, Hezbollah starts to attack Israel, starts to wage attacks against Israel, and this is why this conflict is heated again and again up in the region. Every time there is a conflict or there is a certain situation that causes these clashes again between Hezbollah and Israel. Like for example, there is no clashes or any direct confrontation, not in 2006 or now, between the Lebanese official army and Israel. It is only between Hezbollah and Israel. What's happening today is that Hezbollah, because they built this militia under the cause of defending the Palestinians, under the cause of the fact that they are enemies with Israel. They are trying to show that they are helping Hamas, they are helping the Palestinians in Gaza. This is why they are putting pressure on the Israelis, on the Israeli army from the northern borders of Israel. And it is a big pressure because they are causing a lot of troubles for the Israeli government, political troubles, because thousands and thousands of civilians from the northern cities of Israel are evacuating from that area, are going to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or other cities that are relatively safer for them, and that means economic crisis, a lot of expenses for the government that is covering the expenses of relocating for these displaced civilians of Israelis, because the Israeli government does not do like what Hamas does, put the civilians as human shields. They encourage them to leave the borders because of Hezbollah's attacks. It causes a lot of logistical challenges for the IDF, because they are forced to push more troops, more Israeli troops on the borders with Lebanon, to make sure that there is no huge harm that's going to come from Hezbollah, from Lebanon's side. And of course, this puts pressure also on Israel military wise, because they are trying to eliminate Hamas in Gaza, in southern Israel, and again in the north because of Hezbollah.
That's a great point. So they're putting pressure on Israel by stretching their capabilities both in the north and then in the south. Could you also speak to the role Hezbollah plays in the region and with Hamas? I know there was reports that Hezbollah played a role in training Hamas militants before October 7th. I know they've also trained the Houthis in the Red Sea and within Yemen. So what role does Hezbollah play? Because it seems to me that they are one of the strongest proxies for Iran in the region.
They are. I could say that they are the most sophisticated proxy for Iran in the region. They have the military skills, they have the political skills, they have the propaganda skills. And Hezbollah is not only an armed militia, they are a drug cartel. They smuggle drugs, they help cartels in Mexico and Latin America to smuggle drugs into other countries, including the United States. And there are a lot of reports about that. So Hezbollah is uh, very skillful on many levels, and this is why Iran counted on them and to deal with many challenges. Like Hezbollah is the group that armed and trained the Houthis of Yemen. It's also another Iran-backed militia in the Arabian Gulf region. Hezbollah helped them since day one in the war in Yemen to wage attacks against Saudi Arabia and UAE. And now we see where the threat of the Houthis are going. They are literally threatening the international trade because they are attacking ships and naval routes in the Red Sea, which is causing a very serious economic crisis that even economy here in the United States can be affected because of it. The Iran, for example, counted on Hezbollah to help and aid the Assad regime when he was on the brink of a big fall down after the uprising of 2011. Hezbollah militias went to Syria, killed thousands of Syrians to make sure that Assad, which is we can say another proxy for Iran to stay in power. And of course, in regards of Hamas, Hezbollah give big aid to Hamas during the last decade. Hezbollah inside Lebanon, they hosted Hamas, they hosted political leaders for Hamas, but they also hosted Al Qassam militias. They hosted the militias related to Hamas, trained them, aided them, and also in some circumstances helped them hide from the Israeli attacks that aim to take off Hamas leaders. I heard the horrible news in Arabic at the beginning of the current war in Gaza, and Al Qassam militias, the Palestinian militia of Al Qassam, was calling on Palestinians and Lebanese who are inside Lebanon and want to go and fight to recruit them. They told them recruitment is open to go and fight the Israelis. So Hezbollah is making Lebanon a station to wage attacks from Lebanon against the Israeli territory, but also to recruit people to go fight. Nobody knows where and how to reach Gaza.
Hmm. And what are the ideological similarities between Hamas and Hezbollah, and how does that fit into Iran's bigger vision to export the Iranian Revolution across the region and to fight Israel?
Yes, so Iran is controlled by what they call themselves as the Islamic regime of Iran. So it is an Islamic regime. They count on a Sharia law and in ruling the country. They are they involve politics with religion. So it is a sort of political Islam group. Hezbollah is like this, and because of this way of governing, they during the last decades they worked on changing the face of Lebanon, one of the most open and diverse countries in the Middle East. Hezbollah is imposing certain Islamic laws on a few parts of Lebanon. Of course, there are other groups like Christians, like Druze, like even Sunni and Shia Muslims who try to challenge these attempts by Hezbollah. But of course, Hezbollah is imposing Islamic way of life on the social system in Lebanon, and this is what Hamas does as well in Gaza. This is why today, when the war started, there were very few Christians and indigenous Christians who remained in Gaza because of the Islamic laws that Hamas imposed on civilian Gazans. And unfortunately, we don't hear a lot of people who talk about this or ask why, at the first place, the numbers of the Christians dwindled in Gaza from tens of thousands to few hundreds today. Although Israel was not in Gaza, Hamas was in charge in Gaza, and it is because of this Islamist way of governing, which they all share with Iran.
Hmm. And in closing, I want to ask, do you think a ceasefire or some sort of deal with Hamas will then prevent escalations with Hezbollah in the north? Is this kind of a, you know, the fighting ceases in Gaza and therefore those tensions will now ease? Or do you think there's potential for tensions with Lebanon and Hezbollah to kind of unfold into its own conflict separate from what's happening with Hamas?
Mhm. We may see brief de-escalation because here there is a very important point that I want to mention, that Hezbollah is not opening a large-scale war on Israel, not only because they are not capable of doing so militarily, because they are somehow capable of opening large-scale attacks, because according to the military leadership in Israel, Hezbollah is way more capable and poses a way bigger threat than Hamas to Israel. But because the Lebanese people, the other political groups in Lebanon, are really pressuring Hezbollah to avoid dragging Lebanon into a large scale war with Israel. And this is why we see Hezbollah attacking Israel, but he's also careful and want to risk averse and not drag Lebanon into a big trouble with Israel. What's going to happen in the future if a ceasefire takes place? It's still unknown. We may see a brief de escalation, as I mentioned, but I think on the long term, Hezbollah is an imminent threat to Israel and to the security of Israel as Hamas. What we saw happening in October 7th is because Israel, the international community, delayed the importance of dealing with the threat of Hamas, the fact that Hamas was accumulating power and arms, and because that trouble was delayed and nobody dealt with it, October 7th happened, and the power, the arms, the militias, the trained men that Hezbollah is accumulating inside Lebanon on the very close borders to Israel is a big threat to Israel, and a big threat to the U.S. national interests in the region, in the Middle East region. And let's all remember that Hezbollah is not only in Lebanon; they are also in Syria, which they went to since 2011 to help and aid Bashar al-Assad. And in Syria, Hezbollah has large, sophisticated military bases, which are also, in many cases, very close to the borders with Israel.
Hmm. Well, Hadil, thank you so much for illuminating this very complex topic and breaking it down for us. Where can our audience follow your work? What are your socials?
They can follow me on Twitter at Hadil Uwais.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And we will most definitely be having you on again soon. You can follow the Fearless Project podcast on all streaming services, and I'll see you guys next week.